Okay.
Well, that shut everybody down.
I'm trying to remind myself that Heidi's going to be online at school, and I'm trying to situate her desk so that I'm not forgetting and walking behind her wearing pajamas or whatever.
Right. True enough.
And when I get dressed for church, I have to go put on a clean t-shirt. Otherwise, you don't know what I have on.
Right. Same here.
I've noticed I don't do as much wash. You know, we just keep putting the same thing back on every day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We wash ours every day. We get all sweaty when we go on our walk.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
By the way, the
I'm
football
not working
players are
hard enough
probably,
to sweat.
Me either.
I have my sweaty walking clothes in the morning, and then I take them off.
Well, I see Christine's name there, but I don't see Christine.
Yeah.
Christine Stevens.
Yeah. I've asked. I think she can hear us.
What is it?
Christine.
Oh, you know, I don't have my, wait a minute. I'll get my hearing aid. I'll be back.
Ma'am's gone to get the hearing aid. There's Christine.
Oh,
There's Christine.
Hi.
Hey.
Muted, I think.
Steve is on purpose muted himself.
Then you always want to have if you're teaching, then you always long for a mute button, you know, just like.
Here comes Bill Kerwin. I hear Paul
All
coming up
right.
the steps.
There he
This,
is.
channel.
There's Karen.
Paul. Mary and Karen are getting on.
Here comes Paul.
Your chair over.
Is Galen coming today or is she away?
Is who?
She's
Galen.
away. She's away at preacher boot camp.
Okay.
I hope she'll read today's chapters.
I feel like preacher boot camp sounds something like Baptist Vacation Bible School. You know?
Yeah.
They're going to have to do those like Bible verse drills and things like that.
That's right.
Where you had to hold up your Bible when you found the verse.
Yeah.
Right.
And I was always terrified that I had the wrong one and that I would stand up and read aloud and be like a verse off. Oh my God.
So stressful.
Very stressful. Bible school memories, yes.
Really?
Well, we used to go to all the Bible schools in town, no matter what church it was, because they had air conditioning and snacks
Yeah.
in South Georgia, you know. So that was one place you could go and get air conditioning.
There you go. Small price to pay.
Yeah, and it was free childcare. So our parents would just send us off to, you know, with whatever friend was having Bible school
Yes.
that week.
All right.
Sounds like a good plan.
Yeah, it worked pretty well.
Kelly, Christine has sent a message that she can't hear.
Oh, let's see. So
Yeah, I
it's
saw her message.
Well, Christine Stevens is with us.
Yeah.
let's see.
Yeah,
She can't hear.
Let me.
Oh,
She can see us, she
There we go.
said.
oh, okay.
Why can't she hear?
It's
Well, that's what we're trying to figure out.
thing,
It could be, this has happened to me before when I've been on Zoom and couldn't hear. I had muted my own keyboard.
Yeah, well, maybe that's what she did, because I
Yeah.
did it
Send
first.
her a text back.
I'm sending her a message.
I am too. I just chatted her.
How would you mute your own keyboard? Right here. You push that button right there, it mutes it. So that's the volume control, those three buttons.
Why don't you pull the screen down so everything's larger?
This screen doesn't work because it doesn't have a hinge that works anymore. Oh, the screen itself.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, Christine's disappeared.
Hold on to that.
She didn't get disturbed.
Maybe she's logging off and logging back in.
Yes.
Mary and Karen are also muted, I see. Or
Okay.
they want to be.
So who is St. David's? Is that Galen or is that somebody else?
Possibly. Possibly.
Yeah. So
Ah,
maybe she's going to join us remotely from
That'd be
boot
nice.
camp.
I sort of thought
Right.
she might do that, but oh, I'm sorry we lost.
Well, shall we get started? My computer says it's 4:05.
Yeah.
That's what I have. Mhm.
So today we were to have read 3 more chapters, 5, 6, and 7. They're all pretty different. And John Slater sent a question ahead of time that I wanted to answer first off.
Thank you.
Let me see if I can find it. I have trouble doing Zoom and
It
my
is.
email.
It is,
does.
yes.
I said my beard in that picture.
Hey, Galen's here.
Thank you.
All right.
You'll know the answer to that question, June.
Okay.
Is haircut day.
Okay. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
loud and clear.
Okay, good. So John Slater had asked, he noted that on page 71, I write that St. David's had a congregation of 122 members, 69 of whom were communicants. And then he wanted to know what's the difference between a member and a communicant, and where did I get those numbers? So the numbers came from the annual parochial report that a priest is supposed to submit to the diocese. And I had those for some years, but not all years. But I happen to have it for this particular year. And I did contact the diocese and ask them, did they have files of all the copies of all the parochial reports, but I was told no, that they don't keep them like that. So, and the difference between a communicant and a member, and Galen, you correct me if I'm wrong on this, please. A communicant is a member who has been confirmed in the Episcopal Church. So in other words, you can have someone who attends St. David's all the time and considers themselves members, and they participate in activities and possibly or probably pledge, but they have never been confirmed, and so they are simply members.
Or received.
Okay, is that right?
But a
Confirmed or
communicant could also be somebody who can take communion, which you would be if you were a member.
Well, that's
Back
right. I'll just say it this way: in the old days, the rule was if you were not confirmed, if you were not truly a communicant, you were not meant to take communion early along. That's why I put that story in about John Rivers giving communion to Molly and Jerry Schwartz children. Because John, you know, was about love and about the heart rather than about the rules, as I think most of our priests have been. And so, but I love that story. And she sent me that story a long time ago when, in an email when she knew I was writing the history, and I held on to it until I had the chance to use it.
they can also be they can also be received. They don't have to be confirmed. They could have been confirmed in another tradition and received in the Episcopal Church. And I wonder, June, if because the parochial report is submitted to the diocese, but it's mandated by the national church. So I wonder if the national church probably keeps the record should anybody be interested.
Wow,
the national church is where we actually submit it and a copy goes to the diocese.
I see.
When you go online to that webpage, having submitted it several times on behalf of St. David's,
interesting.
I tried to go back and look something up, but they wouldn't let me go back in, even though I still had the passcode number.
They do shut it down at some point, and even if you're like late submitting something, they shut it down and you have to request access, and then they let you back in. And it's a real rigmarole.
I'll pop in with a little story. When we first joined St. David's, we had gotten married in the Catholic church in town because that's what Brian was historically, was Catholic. I was a Southern Baptist, and so we really did not like that church going there. And we'd been attending, and they were just very adamant about the communion. You know, they would stand up there and sort of give you all the rules every week that, you know, they'd sort of list everybody who could not come up. And so it was really awful. And then we came to St. David's, and Heidi was tiny, you know, and as soon as she could sort of walk and eat anything, you know, Michael gave her, you know, bread to eat up front, and it was so
I remember
great.
that.
Uh-huh.
And she just loved going up there to get that little piece of bread. So anyway.
Right.
Whenever our grandkids visit, one time they were in for a while. This was the last time, and then they got a little antsy, and so Steve took him into the fellowship hall. But she hollered over her shoulder. Clara said to me, "Make sure I get back in time for the bread." She wanted to make sure she came back for that. Yeah.
Oh, that's fabulous. That's
It's good to know
John
we
Slater
have
should feel good about that. He was the one that came up with our recipe.
Right.
I
You know-
especially like Arlo's comment one time
Oh, God.
that when he was after the bread, he was offered the wine. He said, "No, thank you. I don't care for wine."
Not a fan of wine.
Oh dear.
I don't care for wine.
I think Pat Steinbrook also asked a question about the fifth chapter 5. She wanted to know how many of us have been here in the time. How many of us who are on the Zoom call, and if I can think of maybe everybody who was here is on the Zoom call. If you were on the Zoom call in John's time, why don't you just let Pat know that now?
We were there.
Yeah.
I know all those people in the picture.
Yeah, that's right.
We
I
were-
wondered on that one picture was on page 89. How
Right.
many of you knew those
Right.
people?
So
We
John
were
and
away
Margot,
from 1980 to 1994.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
but Gretchen, you and John were here.
We were here in the
Oh.
late 70s.
Right, so
Yeah,
you
the
would have
beginning.
known the people on the in the picture on page 89. You and
Yes,
John
we do.
would have.
Yes.
And let's see, is Christine still on?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
we
Yes.
Okay,
can.
I'm here. Right. Yeah,
Okay.
we joined in the mid to late 70s because I remember Kevin was born in 77 and bringing him as an infant to church. And then there was no nursery because he was the only one who qualified. Often he would snooze during the sermon, which was great. But if he didn't, and I would go up to take him out, Gene Rivers would come over, take him out of my arms and take him outside, which was so sweet.
Yeah.
Nice.
And of course, the Kerwins were at St. David's during that chapter 5.
Yeah.
For
Chapter,
much of the
yes,
time.
we arrived in 77.
Right. And so, Pat, I was just going to say, the university grew more from the late 60s to the late 70s probably than any other time in its history. And so a lot of new faculty came at that time, which of course there were also more students. And not sure how that worked as far as how many of them we reached, but we tried for sure.
In the late 70s was and probably early 80s after we had left, was the time of the St. David's strings. We asked our children if they remembered it, and they said, well, we remember the pictures.
Right. There are pictures in the book of the St. David's strings. So what else? Margot, did you have any outstanding thoughts about chapter 5 you wanted to bring to our attention?
Well, one thing that just brought back to me that I'd sort of forgotten or maybe have been repressing was when we first started going to St. David's, it was during the period of the trial liturgy. And of course, we hadn't been Episcopalians, so we weren't really familiar with the prayer book, and it just seemed really confusing because one Sunday we'd have liturgy out of one book, and maybe 2 or 3 Sundays later we'd have liturgy out of another book. But eventually that all got resolved, and we have the current prayer book.
I don't have,
Time.
I don't have the book here in front of me. It must be in the other room, but there was a funny quote on page 82. Is that still chapter 5 or?
It is.
Yes.
It is.
Oh, you can, June, I don't have it, so you can read it. It was the comment about the bazaar.
Oh, right. I love that.
Oh,
I couldn't
gosh.
wait to get
Yes.
that in there. You want me
Yes.
to read it?
Yes, read that.
So we had a bazaar every year to raise money. The Episcopal Church women and/or the Altar Guild, and Ruth Nelson was often in charge of it. And let's see what year this would have been. I don't say which year. Oh, in the late 70s. It was in 1980. Ruth Nelson embraced the changing culture of the 70s as more and more women were employed outside the home. That bazaar grossed $300. Ruth was president of the Episcopal Church Women when it decided not to participate in the bazaar the following year. And then I quote her, had 25 women pledged 25 cents per week or $13 a year to the ECW Treasury, we could have eliminated the headaches and the backaches associated with the bazaar. And so no more.
It reminded me in the 80s, we lived in Georgia, and Steve and I were active in our church, our Redeemer Lutheran Church, and we put on a summer fest that was this all day long thing with kids activities and like a carnival, and then there was a all you could eat chicken dinner, and it was just so much work that we were going to start doing that. We would just pay people. Whoever said they would have come, we were just going to like buy tickets and pay them not to come, but we would contribute money to the fund because it was fun, but boy, by the end of the day, we were tired out. It reminded me of that. Yeah.
One of the things that we enjoyed most, having to do with church fun things to do together, was our cider press at Mountain Heritage Day.
Yeah.
All the kids really got into that.
That was great. The Rivers family owned this huge cider press. I have a cider press. It's much smaller, but theirs was really big, and people would go get apples and bring them. And then, of course, after you press them, you have all the waste you have to take away.
Mm-hmm.
There are pictures in the book of that, but it was really fun. And there's nothing like fresh pressed cider. It tastes so good.
Mm-hmm.
But again, it became a situation where the money that it raised and the effort that it took to do it. And of course, after the Rivers left, the cider press went with them. I think Bill Kerwin made several years after that an efforts to have a booth at Mountain Heritage Day where he would have coffee, but eventually that stopped too. So we just raise our money on the plate and our pledge mostly, besides our auction, which we'll get to another day, not today, next week. We'll talk about
Good
that.
opportunity.
I think I would have really liked Ruth. I love her comments that's on 83. I would agree with this one. It's very much me as well. I'm an Anglo-Catholic feminist.
Yeah.
Perfect. That's definitely me.
She also
I had a question. She also did a what?
Well, she did a wonderful job with creating the British American Student Exchange, and a lot of our parishioners' children went, including our daughter Shannon. She was only 12 at the time. I think she was the youngest one that year. It was like several weeks. They would come to us for several weeks one summer, and then we would go, one of our children would go to them.
Yeah, and Ellen Haberlin went then, and Jenny Nye came here. That was a wonderful exchange, wasn't it?
It was.
Von Kent came here.
Our daughter Alicia went to,
Right.
we hosted Samantha Croft, and the next year Alicia went to England, and it was really great.
We had 2 students, Richard and Stephen went, and then we had a chaperone one year that was a lot of fun.
The year that Shannon went was the year that Princess Diana and Prince Charles got married, and that was a big deal. Because that was while they were there.
Galen, did you have a comment earlier?
I had a question. I am not familiar with the deaf ministry in our diocese. Do you know if that has continued? I have, in all my years here, never heard of it.
Say the name again, ministry?
The deaf ministry.
Deaf?
Oh,
The deaf
Ministry to the
ministry.
deaf?
Oh, yes, my goodness. Oh, yes, John Rivers was actually not the first minister to the deaf. There had been one gentleman before him, but not continuous to him. But when
But I
he,
don't know if it's still going on.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering. What was the length of it, I guess?
I don't have that page open. I can't remember.
the Ministry of the Deaf starts on 88.
It ended with when John retired. The ministry
Oh, okay.
ended.
Yeah, it says until he retired in 1998.
Right.
But there was
That's it.
no one to
He
take it.
was a missioner for 17 years, and when he retired finally, after 42 years as a priest, that ministry was not carried on. It was really created in a way for him, or his misfortune of losing his hearing became fortune for those who were able then to have a priest who could sign his sermons. But I don't, as far as I know, there have been none since John.
He had a large congregation, I think.
He did, yeah. He preached at in Asheville at Trinity one Sunday, and then alternated the other Sunday at the school for the deaf in Morganton, where they lived at the time.
I wonder why they didn't continue it. It's a long time to have a ministry that suddenly dropped.
Yes.
You know, my
Probably there
guess
was
is
nobody
there was
qualified.
simply no one to pick it up. There was no priest in the diocese either who was hearing and willing to do what all John did. I mean, he went to UT and took like social work classes on how to deal with people who are hard of hearing. He went actually to Gallaudet in Washington for a summer. And then he and his whole family took signing at the community college here in town. So it was a huge effort. But of course he was motivated because he himself was going deaf. But without that motivation, it would be a huge challenge for someone.
It's been a while since I've been to convention, but the last time I was at convention, they had someone interpreting.
Did they?
Sign language.
Okay. Yeah.
Not
I'm
the
very
past
much
times.
in touch with Sally Rivers. We correspond at least once a week now, and she has just finally left that cabin in the woods where John died,
Yes.
and found an apartment in Asheville. So she's happy.
She was on the discussion last week, Nan, but I don't believe she has tuned in today.
Yeah, I thought she would, because this would be about her dad.
Right.
Oh, because I told her we were doing it today.
Right. Yeah, she got the message, I'm sure. Carol sent it to her. Is there anything else in the chapter 5?
Was that cookbook in chapter 5?
Yes.
Anybody have are any of those still around? That would be fun to look at.
Jane Horton has one. She's a former parishioner, and she's the one that provided the photo or provided the book. Actually, that was one of those Shaggy Dog stories of the writing of the book, because when I wanted that picture, she was in California, and she had the book with her in California. But she didn't have an iPhone, but she had a friend who had an iPhone. So she got her friend to come over and photograph the cookbook and send me the photo. And then I put it in the book. Yeah.
Teamwork.
Well, shall we move on to chapter 6?
Okay.
Let me just say at the outset, this was the chapter that I have to say I dreaded writing at the beginning, because it was just very emotional and it was very difficult. But as it turned out, it really wasn't that hard in the end. I tried very hard to say how excited we were that we had a woman priest, the first one in the diocese, and to lay out how carefully that selection was made. And I quoted Nancy Tuttrup's letter in the whole letter in the book because I thought it was so perfect.
It was excellent.
The spirit of St. David's, really, that we've had all along, I think. And you know, some of us who know Tom Wilcox very well and for a long time tease him about being a pack rat. Well, he was the one person, there was none in the records, nowhere, but he had saved a copy of the survey that we did with the consultant.
Yes.
About our feelings about Sherry. And with that in hand, I was able, I thought, to lay it out, at least that part of it clearly, so that if you hadn't known what was happening, you would know. Sherry was really a betwixt and between. She was pulled on in so many directions because she was the first woman. She was asked to do many things that subsequent women in the diocese haven't necessarily been asked to do, or if they have been, they were asked because of their special skills or what they had to bring to it. Not that she didn't have those, but she was an anomaly, and in the end, it just seemed like it was simply, at the end of the day, it was not a good match for the parishioners.
Mm-hmm.
For the students, it was the best match. We had the most vigorous student organization that we had ever had up to then, really, and have had since while she was here. So it was just hard. And the bishop, even, I quote him saying, how hard it would be or is to divide your time like that, half for the parish and half for the students. And he really, when she was hired, he really meant it to be that way because the diocese paid half of her salary and the church paid half. And so the diocese expected her to develop a vigorous campus ministry, which indeed she did. But it left some of the parishioners feeling unpastored. And so people began to not be happy. But the consultant came, and in the next chapter, we'll talk about next week. We really went to a lot of links to what soothe everybody's feelings and make everybody feel welcome and wanting to be there. What would anybody else add?
I think you did a good job, June, in
Yes.
covering that. And you got, what you did was you got the facts down. And a lot of good things happened then. And we all feel, I think every one of us who was there then, we just felt it was, I still have trouble articulating what went wrong. I remember Heber Peacock and Bishop Johnson and I were in a car for about an hour together, and Heber and the bishop asked me about that, and I still, and that was, you know, it was about a year after after she had left, and I still couldn't articulate the problem, and I still can't. It's still very difficult for me to figure out. I still don't have I don't have a really good perspective, even though I was there and I was close up. I guess it was the old story of just, not being able to see the forest because of the trees. But I think you've done a good job of putting down the facts and what happened during that time.
Well, we missed that entire ministry. So that was just folks who are newer. We're in the same boat you are. We just can, and June, I think you've done a fabulous job of laying it out.
When you read all the things, the activities she was involved in,
Yes.
it's no wonder that she didn't have time to be a parish priest.
Yeah.
And her heart, it wasn't that her heart wasn't with the parish, but she loved what she was doing with the students. And she had all these opportunities to make a go of that ministry.
Plus the fact that she had to go off for all these meetings. They're here, there, and the other place.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm talking about, all those commissions and things that she was doing.
Right. At the end of the day, I would always have to say it had nothing to do with the fact that she was a woman. It had to do with an unrealistic expectation of a person who was barely 30 years old, and this was her first church. And to me, that sort of sums it up, really. I don't think there was anybody who, Margot would, in quote unquote, didn't like her. Everybody liked her, but they just felt like that she wasn't able to do for the parish all that was needed.
I just wanted to say too that, I've just only heard about it, and I thought you did a great job of telling the story from an objective standpoint, but still I was exhausted when I finished reading it. So I can only imagine what it was like to live through it.
We were exhausted to live it, let me know.
I bet so, yeah. Did anyone stay in touch with her over the years?
She's on Facebook. I'm her friend on Facebook. I have no idea if she's ever ordered a book.
Yeah.
My daughter stays in touch with her pretty closely. Courtney just loves Sherry, and vice versa, and she does stay in touch with her. So if that would be a segue into the next chapter, I would just want to point out then that for a year after Sherry left, one whole calendar year, we had not even an interim. The calendar year 1988, we didn't have an interim. And it was just up to us, the parishioners, to see that things happen. So there were all kinds of committees formed, and different ones made sure we had a priest. Betty Lynn made sure we had hymns and I had an organist. We continued to do the kinds of activities that we had been doing, just different ones of us stepped up. And to me, it's just that period was in a way a throwback to those earlier chapters that we studied last week, because the leadership within the congregation has always been really important at St. David's. And the more that there's been a collaboration between that.
June, Nancy here.
Between that collaboration and the priest, the more successful we've been, I think. Yeah.
Someone had a question?
June?
Well,
Nancy here.
Nancy has one.
Oh, it's Nancy, okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Nancy.
I remember those years that you're talking about from '88, when Alice would come over occasionally and do a deacon's mass.
Right.
And how very much y'all were kind to her and very appreciative. And she got to know several of you pretty well.
That's right. And she and Heber were real close, and Heber was very supportive of her and welcoming to her as a minister for us, to minister to us. not as a priest, but as a deacon. But yeah, that was when our relationship with her really began.
I remember she substituted for Sherry sometimes when Sherry was off at meetings. She would come and, as you said, Nancy, do a deacon's mass, and her, I don't know if you call them a homily from a deacon, but they always just hit the right spot with me.
Mm-hmm.
Does anyone know what Sherry's
And let
feeling
me
of
tell
the
you
time
something.
was?
What Sherry's what?
What Sherry's feeling about the time was?
I know that she was, she continued actually to work with students for the following 6 months. She stayed, the Bishop Weinauer gave her permission to stay in the rectory through June of that year, and we continued to pay her, which some folks didn't like, but we did. He felt that was only fair. So she continued with the students. As far as how she felt about us, she did write a letter, and I quote that in the book. Other than that letter, I don't have anything to add. Does anybody else?
You talked to her, didn't you, June, when you were writing the book? I thought
Just to let her know that it was happening. I did not interview her as such, the way I did John Rivers.
I guess that was my question. I wonder, she was so young and had such a large job, especially considering her newness to the priesthood and her youth. I just wonder, as she's gotten older, what her reflection had been on the ministry. Because I would imagine that was a painful time for her as well.
Oh,
it
was very painful. Yeah, absolutely. It was painful for everybody. It truly was painful, and yet I don't think any of us felt hopeless. We felt some discouragement. The fact that we didn't have any money hardly then to just turn the lights on. But we borrowed from ourselves and funds that had been set up for other purposes. And they were all eventually, I document in the book, all those funds were paid back. And so we were able to still fulfill our obligations that we had to do.
June?
Yes, go ahead.
I have a question. I, in a way, kind of hesitant to ask it, but my sense has been that one of the stated ministries that St. David's has wanted to be involved and developed has been a ministry with the students and personnel of Western. And one of the thoughts when I read that chapter was that there probably has not been a time before or since when a ministry with the students at Western had the positive momentum that seems to be reflected in her ministry as stated in that chapter. So my question is, was there an extent to which some ambivalence began to develop about whether or not we as a church, that is, we as St. David's, can really embrace a developing ministry with the students, and at the same time feel that that we as a church are are being nourished as we desire to be.
Okay, Paul, let me do the best I can to answer your question, and then I would ask others to jump in. I find it very ironical when I was doing the research that first of all, you have to remember that the church was reopened as a student center. It wasn't reopened as a mission church. It was reopened as a student center. That's how Rufus got the money. He pled to the women in New Orleans at their annual meeting for money to reopen this church to minister to the students at this growing university. And so the early ministers that we shared with St. John's and Silva had what was called a Canterbury Club on campus. And they met with groups of students, and they saw that they had transportation to go to Silva for Eucharist if it wasn't being offered in Cullowhee, which in the early days it wasn't. And did a lot with the students, and that was all just parishioners who did that. The irony that I'm getting around to explaining is that the year that John Rivers came as a full-time priest and chaplain, and that's the way his job description read, full-time priest and chaplain. The year he came, there was no Canterbury Club photo in the yearbook. In other words, the interest of students had already waned to the point that that club was dissolved for lack of members. And so during John's time here, he did what he could. He, in interviewing, because I was here when he was here, and in interviewing him for the book, he talked about going on campus in his clerical collar and talking to students when they would talk to him, about going actually in the dormitories and talking to students, and having students over to his house. But we didn't see a lot of those students at church. And that was where I think the laity, the members of the church, we all said we wanted to have students, and we would do things like make packets for them during exam week. But then it came to where the application for admission to the university no longer had on it a religious preference. So there was no way for us to know specific Episcopal students. So it had to be, anything we did had to be very, very general. And then when Sherry came, because of her age, I think, she was, I forget, 31 maybe, her age, and had been a student recently herself, she just really felt an affinity with the students and was able to relate to them in ways that, just say, using John as an older man, had not been able to do. And also, she just gave them lots and lots and lots of time. And in doing that was to develop personal relationship. We all know that's what matters. That's what makes a difference. If somebody comes, that's why we have our welcoming ushers at St. David's and other ways we have of keeping in contact with folks when they show up the first time. If there's no relationship developed, there can't be much that follows. And so she did that. Well, when she left, we, as I said already, we had a whole year when we didn't even have an interim priest. And then Heber came. Heber was fantastic. We would have kept Heber forever if we could have, but he was an interim. And once again, he was there only 2 days a week, one of those days being Sunday. Well, he personally couldn't do a whole lot about developing a ministry. And so, trying to answer your question without getting in too many details, on down the road, Michael's interest was not in developing in-campus ministry. He had sort of been there, done that in a previous life, and he wanted to do something different. And so, once again, none of us picked up the ball and ran with it. We could have. We all said we wanted students, but we didn't really do what was necessary in order to recruit students and have them feel welcome. So now that the diocese has a person whose job it is to help churches develop campus ministry when they are by a campus, as we are, I think we will now have a new opportunity to be more engaged in this kind of thing than we have recently. Put it that way. Does that help, Paul?
Yeah. I guess I'm just sitting kind of with the feeling. It feels like that there was a real ambivalence that maybe was not totally identified, and certainly it wasn't able to be resolved. I think listening to Bill Kerwin today just really, I felt that out of his experience, if I was hearing him accurately.
Well, you've hit it. We had someone who was doing the job with the students, but the other part of the parish felt neglected, and and also her age and being asked to do those two things, really, I think, no, I don't care who had come to St. David's, to do both campus ministry and to minister to the people at St. David's. I don't think anyone,
there's only
given the setup, given the way she would, given the expectation of the diocese, given the expectation of St. David's, it would have been impossible for anybody. Something would have had to give.
As far as the idea of ambivalent, Paul, over the life of the church, I think it's not that the parish has felt ambivalent about whether or not we should minister to students. Rather, it's been the lack of will to invest the time and the effort that takes. And with Sherry, she did invest the time that it took. But since she was here, it hasn't coalesced around a true campus ministry. Now, if you did a poll of our current membership, I mean, Margot, would you agree with me? I mean, 99% of the people would say, yes, we want to have a campus ministry.
We did when we were doing our profile.
That's definitely what I've heard. And my hope is that with Kelsey beginning and we started our conversations, I'm hoping that that's a much better model for the diocese to not expect the clergy who needs to be pastorally and otherwise present to a congregation to carry all that, but to be a support to the missioner and making the link to the congregation. Hopefully that will be a much better model. It's a new one
I think you're right, Galen. It's a much better model.
Definitely. So we have, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, we have a new blank slate just to see what our interests are and what time we're willing to commit to working with the new person whose name I escapes me this minute. To
Kelsey.
Yes, to really have a campus ministry.
I think the other thing with that is, I'm putting her name in the chat if you're one of those people who it's easier to remember a name if you see it. It's also, it relieves us of the coming up with all the ideas, which is a tiring part of leadership, you know, to come up with all the ideas, the laity and the clergy. So the ideas can generate from her actually being on campus and getting to know people, and we can partner in those without having to bear all the responsibility, which certainly she would love our input, but we don't have to carry the weight of it, which I think will be good.
Yeah.
Yes, that's a big difference.
Not to go too far off the book study, but perhaps we could invite Kelsey to occasionally put something in the coracle, you know, just start building the knowledge of who she is and what she's doing and how she sees a tie to St. David's without being, well, central is the wrong word, but without being, you know, this big new thing, but simply this is who I am, this is what I'm doing, and a repetitive kind of getting to know who you are. You know, somebody once said the key to communication is redundancy, you know, so maybe we need to be a little redundant, you know.
She's open to that. She's also open to speaking at, you know, an adult forum or something like that. What she's not open to for at least a year is preaching. She's been very clear. She's not preaching for a year. She does have a divinity degree though from Vanderbilt. So that's exciting, I think. Got well trained.
Excellent. We do have 8 minutes now to go over chapter 7.
I see. Well, Margot, you started to say something earlier. Did you have something more about the students you wanted to add?
No, I don't even remember now.
Oh, okay. So Heber came, he was sent more or less by the diocese, and he was, how to describe him? He was an erudite man who was a common man. Does that make sense? He was so smart. He knew everything. He had the Bible. You felt like he could recite it if you asked him to. And yet his whole manner was so humble and welcoming and loving and open. He was just a remarkable individual. And certainly was a great pastor to us, a great healer, a great teacher, and inspired us truly to build our church back up in terms of numbers and in terms of pledges and in terms of plate offerings. And I think he was a good ambassador from us to the diocese. I think there was a time there when the diocese really looked askance at St. David's, as in, what have you done? And we had evidence of that in different ways. But Heber helped to heal that as well. You all know the romantic story of his asking June Peacock to come and take dancing lessons with him that Nancy Joyner had started. And then they fell in love and were married. They were married at St. David's. That was very special. We were all very happy about that. And then it was time to think, what are we going to do next? he really was with us in terms of being on here on Sunday, really for only 2 years, though his tenure extended into a 3rd year, a lot of that time he was not here, as we had agreed to ahead of time. We were willing to have him whenever we could get him. But eventually the financial picture looked bleak. How can we have a priest? The diocese isn't going to pay half again like they did for Sherry. How can we have a priest? And so it was offered up that we could get a loan from the diocese, a 5-year loan that we would pay back one part at the time over 5 years. And Michael also took a salary cut, significant salary cut, to come to St. David's. He so badly wanted to be here and wanted to be at this church, wanted to be in these mountains. And so all of that put together with the overarching idea that if we had a priest, would help us and reinvigorate us to be more outreaching, and we would get new members, and then the money crisis would be solved. And that's exactly what happened, which we'll talk about next week. What else about, anything else about Heber's interim that you remember or would like to share?
Well, I remember when I was a senior warden, and Heber and I had a meeting to go over the agenda before the next vestry meeting, and he was in. I remember he was in our downstairs at our house in Cullowhee, and he said, "Well, I have an important announcement." I said, "Well, what is that, Heber?" He said, "I got engaged yesterday." I didn't know what to say. I said, "Congratulations," and I felt that was hardly enough. But
you know, he and June had only known each other for 6 weeks when he proposed to her.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
But, at their time of life, you know, they knew it when they saw it. And June wrote in her memoir that she said the 19 years she spent with him were the happiest of her life.
If Tom were here, he would tell one of his favorite stories about Heber. I think it was probably the 2nd year he was here. The church decided we would give him a case of wine for a Christmas present. They really didn't need things, you know. And so I don't remember, was Newt or Bill, somebody picked out a case of mixed bottles, different bottles of nice wine. And Tom said, or somebody said, "Heber, you've got a bottle for each month of the year." And he said, "Oh, I thought it was a bottle for each of the 12 days of Christmas."
Or the 12
That
apostles.
doesn't sound like a converted Baptist.
Oh, goodness. He was amazing. St. Francis was his idol, and he certainly lived his St. Francis prayer every day. But, you know, to give us credit where credit's due, the worker bees kept working those 2.5 years that he was our interim, and made it possible. Of course, we had to do another self-study, which is...
I said to Steve, you guys were always having to do a self-study. You know, it seemed like...
That's right.
I thought, oh, just look at the other one. Yeah.
I was interested in how quickly these were done.
Right, in
Shorter than
comparison.
the last one we did.
That's right. That's right. And they were very different from the last one we did too. Yeah.
And also as with fear of leaving someone out, because you all know who you are. Many of the worker bees during that time are on this call. And those of us who were
I knew he
not
was going
there,
to get choked up.
we thank you.
Mhm.
So
Nice.
that's all. You know, I can't talk without
You can't do it.
my voice cracking. So
That's okay, Steve. That's much appreciated.
That's a good quality.
Yeah.
It's a very good quality.
I wanted to say too
But-
that I wanted to thank June for the way you write, because you did such a good job describing all the people that you know, that I didn't know, and then most of them aren't with us anymore. But I just wrote a couple of their names down: Carl Hill and Nancy Tuttrup, and of course John Rivers and Heber. I mean, I wished that I knew them, because, and not just that, there were others, many people. Certainly, some of you guys are on the screen, but the ones that are not with us anymore, it sounds like they were just so much fun and really good to know. But of course, I guess if I knew them, I wouldn't have known all the people I knew in the 1970s and 80s. But anyway, you did a great job of talking about them and their personalities, and I really enjoyed it.
Thank you. Thank you. Anything else from these years of St. David's? Margot, do you have any Nancy Tuttrup ridiculous story you want to tell us? She was something else. She was a fireball. She never stopped. She never
She
moved.
really was one that just pops in my head when you said that. She cared so much about the cemetery, and of course she left a substantial legacy that formed the cemetery committee. And but during the years that my older boys were in high school, she would hire them to come and do yard work for her. And then she would pay them to go and clean in the cemetery. And she told them that if they didn't keep that cemetery neat looking, she was going to come back and haunt them. She would too.
And she would have too. That's a great story.
I think it's interesting that her Christmas shop still bears her name. I mean, that was that important.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Galen, do you have any questions for us from these 3 chapters that haven't been?
Not that I haven't already asked, no.
Okay.
But it's good. It is remarkable, the number of self-studies. I've been told by at least one parishioner that they wished to have no more self-studies for quite some time, and I see why. Yeah.
Of course, the last self-study was disappointing to several of us because we didn't get a chance to state that the quality we most desired in a priest was sense of humor, which is the only item on the one we did right before Michael came. That was the only item that everybody who took the survey marked. And it's very important.
Sense of humor.
It's a tall order. I have to brush up on my jokes.
All right, Galen, you have your work cut out.
So the next boot camp is not sermon boot camp, but comedy boot camp.
You know, there's not been anything so far in sermon boot camp about levity and humor or online preaching. Yeah, like really.
Right.
Just work.
Just work.
3 minutes late for it too.
Well, I had a educational professor one time that used humor all the time. He said if you link humor with what you want a person to remember, that they'll remember it. Much more likely to remember it than if it's not funny. And so he was kind of a master at being funny about serious stuff. And indeed, those are the kind of things I remember from his class, is what he joked about. So there you go. You need a stand-up comedy priest.
I will say the funniest thing that has happened that I can recall right at the moment in my time serving, and I wasn't a priest yet. So in between your trips to the Commission on Ministry, you serve as you do an internship in a parish that's quite different from yours. And I'm really grateful that I went to this one, because I went to St. Luke's Chun's Cove, which is, if you're familiar with it, it's in Asheville, and it's a little white family size, little white building, family size parish, with a 3/4 time priest and, a 1/4 time administrator. And the administrator was also the organist. So a small parish, similar in some ways to St. David's as far as size. And the church was built in the late 1800s. So the sacristy was downstairs. You had to go down the center aisle and down the stairs to get into the sacristy. And I was setting the table once, and I opened the bread box and I closed it really quickly, and there was a roach inside. Somebody had set the table, they put everything on the credence table the night before, and it wasn't a well sealed bread box. And I looked at Patty Maurer. I'm like standing in front of everybody. The communion rail is closed, and we're just up there together. And I said, "There's a roach." And she was like, "Just set everything out." And I'm like, "No, there's a roach in here." So I finally got her closer, and I said, "There's a roach in the bread box." And of course, what's the first thing? You don't believe it. So she opened the bread box, and it jumped on her chasuble. And then we're both standing there at the altar like, "Now there's a roach on your chasuble." So she's flicked it off, and I'm like, "There's a roach on the floor." And so I'm like standing at the altar, killing a roach. That's just not right. And I was like, "Well, what do I do now?" She's like, "Well, just use them." I'm like, "No, there's marks on the bread that has been eating it." It was so bad. I didn't even know how to get to the sacristy. I didn't even know where the bread was at this point. So it was quite a production. I hope that doesn't happen again.
That's a good start, Galen. That's a good start. Yes. Very good. Very good.
And the congregation apparently had no idea. I'm like, how is that possible? We're all 6 feet from each other, right? But she just very calmly opened the communion rail, went downstairs, came up with some more bread. Meanwhile, I'm moving the dead roach under the altar. Good stuff. Good stuff.
Absolutely.
She's a mentor of mine, as you can imagine.
That's good. All right, last chance. Final word of any kind?
Thanks, everybody.
I would just end it by saying we're still here. We've got some more ground to cover. So I appreciate everybody being here. This is really fun for me.
It's awesome.
And,
Thank you. Good. Great.
I think it's wonderful that so many of our parishioners will really know our history. It's great.
It is, yeah, it is.
Just want to say a shout out to Christine Stevens. So glad she's with us.
Oh, it's wonderful to be here and to see everybody.
Yes.
Come visit.
Right. Yes, come visit when you.
Well, as much as we can.
Right. This is the good part about COVID, getting to visit this way anyhow.
Yes, right.
Good to see you, Christine.
Margot, you have a parting shot?
No, I'm enjoying rereading the book.
Well, you read it enough while it was going on, so thank you for being willing to read it again.
Loving it. I get to revisit all those people that I love so much.
I know.
John Rivers and Carl Hill, and Nancy Tudrup. I mean, she was just Ruth Nelson. Wonderful to spend some time with them again. And thank you all for putting up with our memories.
Well, I enjoy
It's good to share them.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to Michael's early days because we came toward the end. So
yes, all right.
Oh, good.
Very good. Okay, next Wednesday, 4 o'clock, we'll carry on.
everybody.
Okay.
See you then.
Bye.
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 Everyone.
Bye.
That's fun.
How did you know that?
Okay.